Garrett Sullivan cleared 3 rounds of pointless verification before the VIP lounge finally let him through. A middle-aged man in a worn jacket, a faded backpack slung over one shoulder. He had barely settled in when breakfast arrived, and one glance was enough. He reached over and stopped the elderly guest beside him from touching food from the same spoiled batch. Manager Olivia Harper never checked the tray. She called security and branded Garrett a troublemaker. He said nothing, only lifted his phone and made a single call. So why minutes later was the entire VIP lounge locked down? 2 hours before the lockdown, Charlotte Douglas International Airport was just beginning its morning shift, and Garrett Sullivan moved through it the way he always did, unnoticed. The jacket on his shoulders was 15 years old, soft at the elbows, honest about its age. The backpack had outlived 2 laptops and a decade of red-eye flights. He carried a first-class boarding pass on a phone with a cracked corner, and not one person in the terminal looked at him twice. That was the point, and he had built a career on understanding it. Somewhere above these gates, in more than 40 airports across the country, his company's silver emblem hung over lounge entrances like a quiet promise skylight. Comfort, dignity, service without judgment. He had written those words himself 2 decades ago in a rented office with 12 chairs back, when the whole company was one coffee cart and an idea nobody believed in. The disguise was older than the success. Once or twice a quarter, he booked a ticket like any ordinary passenger, wore the clothes he actually owned, and walked into one of his own lounges to see what his money and his mission statements had really built. Marble and orchids told him nothing. The face a server made at a man in a worn jacket told him everything. He had built Skylight through the hardest years of his life, a widower before 40, a single father who raised his daughter alone, while the business swallowed his nights. She was grown now, living her own life on the other side of the country, and what those years had left him was less a fortune than a conviction. The true measure of any place is how it treats people who have no power to punish it. He had once promoted a bartender to regional trainer for quietly covering an exhausted soldier's meal, and once removed a district manager for mocking a janitor's shoes. Inside the company, his standards were famous. His face was not, which was why the reports from Charlotte had been sitting in his chest for 3 weeks, like something swallowed wrong. On paper, this branch was the jewel of the entire network. Satisfaction scores of 98%, month after month, numbers almost too clean to be real. But an analyst on the audit team had noticed what lived underneath the shine guest complaints that appeared in the system at night and vanished by morning. 12 of them in a single quarter, deleted without resolution codes as if the guests had never existed at all. 2 of the vanished complaints had mentioned food. A woman wrote that a chicken wrap had left her sick for 2 days. A man described cream cheese that tasted sour, and a manager who shrugged when he said so. Both entries had been logged, time-stamped, and then erased before headquarters ever saw them. Perfect ratings, Garrett knew, are sometimes built on someone's silence, and he had flown here to find out whose. At headquarters, only Marcus Cole knew the head of internal audit, a careful man who asked no unnecessary questions and made no unnecessary calls. On Garrett's instruction, Marcus had flown a small team into Charlotte the night before. 6 auditors and 2 members of the executive board, briefed in an airport hotel and ordered to stay invisible until Garrett called. The branch itself received no warning of any kind. Garrett booked the first-class fare under his own name, Garrett Sullivan, printed plainly on the reservation for anyone who cared to read it. The name was never the disguise. The jacket was, and in 20 years of these visits, almost no one had ever looked past it. The Skylight Lounge on Concourse D announced itself with frosted glass and warm light, the smell of fresh espresso drifting past the entrance like an invitation. Through the doors, he could see the main room exactly as he had once drawn it on paper: deep leather chairs, a marble buffet island, white orchids at the host stand. Behind the reception desk stood a young woman whose name tag read Sophie Bennett, and beside her, squaring a stack of menus with impatient hands, a manager in an immaculate navy blazer whose gold pin said, Olivia Harper. Sophie greeted him first with the kind of smile that no one had trained into her. She scanned his boarding pass, and the terminal chimed a clean, bright green. "Mr. Sullivan, first class to Seattle, you're all set," she said, already reaching for a welcome card. "The main lounge is straight through, and breakfast service just—" A manicured hand settled on the counter beside her before she could finish. "I'll take this one, Sophie." Olivia Harper's voice was pleasant, the way a blade wrapped in silk is pleasant. Her eyes had already completed their journey, the jacket first, the backpack second, the boarding pass a distant last, as if the order itself were a verdict. "We've rolled out a new verification protocol this month," she told Garrett, the smile never reaching her eyes. "It will only take a moment, sir." The moment multiplied. She asked for identification, and he handed over his license. She studied it the way a cashier studies a suspicious $100 bill, tilting it under the desk lamp. She asked how the ticket had been purchased. Loyalty points, a voucher, a corporate transfer. He answered evenly that he had bought it outright full fare. Her eyebrows made a small, eloquent movement, and she began to type with the theatrical patience of someone documenting a crime. "The fare class isn't syncing on my end," she announced, though the screen in front of her had already confirmed his access in green letters. "I'll need a second form of identification, and the card used for the purchase if you have it on you." Behind her, Sophie's smile faltered into something uncomfortable. "Olivia, the pass already cleared," the young receptionist said quietly. "It shows valid, first-class access, right?" The manager turned her head a precise few degrees. "Sophie, the Delaney party needs fresh towels in the shower suites. Now please." Sophie went with one apologetic glance over her shoulder. Garrett laid a second ID and a plain gray debit card on the marble, no metal edge, no black tear color, nothing that flattered. Olivia looked at that card a full beat longer than she had looked at his face. Then she lifted the desk phone, angled her body away from him, and murmured something into the receiver, glancing back once the way people glance at unattended luggage. What Garrett could not see, and what the branch's own records would later confirm, was the note she typed into his guest profile while the receiver was still cradled against her shoulder. In the field reserved for allergies and seating preferences, she entered a 3-letter internal code the staff used for problem guests, the one that meant flag and monitor. Beneath it, she added 4 words of her own possible fraudulent access observe. She saved the file, restored her smile, and came back to him wearing fresh regret. "Systems are slow this morning," she said. "Bear with us." Over the next 20 minutes, Garrett stood aside and watched her wave through a couple in matching cashmere. With barely a glance, admit a man whose luggage cost more than a used car, and greet a silver-haired executive by name and handshake, asking warmly after his connecting flight. Their boarding passes earned half a second of attention each. His own reservation confirmed paid in full. Glowing green on her screen apparently required a second phone call, a supervisor override, and a third inspection of his license. At one point, she asked him with exquisite politeness to step away from the desk so she could assist the guests behind him. A uniformed security officer from the concourse drifted to the lounge entrance a minute later, summoned Garrett, assumed by the phone call, and stood with folded arms watching him the way museum guards watch a stranger who lingers too long near the paintings. Garrett offered the man a nod. The officer did not return it. He said nothing through any of it. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and memorized the sequence, the selective. Delays the vocabulary of suspicion, the way Olivia's courtesy sharpened into ceremony whenever wealth walked past and curdled the moment her eyes came back to him. Anger would have been easy and completely useless. He had not flown here to feel insulted. He had come to learn why 12 complaints had died in the dark, and the woman in the navy blazer was answering the question without realizing it had been asked. At last, she slid the license back across the counter with 2 fingers, making the return sound like a favor. "You're cleared." Then came the addition delivered with polished sympathy. "Although, I should mention the main lounge is at capacity this morning, so we'll be seating you in our overflow suite. It's quieter back there. Many of our guests actually prefer it." Through the frosted glass behind her, a third of the leather chairs sat empty in the honey-colored light, and both of them could see it. The overflow suite waited at the end of a service corridor past the restrooms and a supply closet behind a plain door that carried no silver emblem at all. 8 tables filled the room. The chairs had gone shiny at the arms from years of use, and the coffee machine in the corner wore a handwritten out-of-order sign taped and retaped so many times the paper had turned soft. The only window faced a concrete blast wall. Somewhere beyond the corridor, faint as a rumor, a piano playlist was playing for other people. He was not alone back here. A man in a mechanic's work jacket dozed with his boots crossed at the ankle. An older woman kept a canvas tote hugged in her lap, as if someone might take it from her. A younger man in a faded hoodie sat guarding the room's single working outlet while his phone charged. Nobody spoke. The room had the quiet of a waiting area, not a lounge. Garrett took the corner table, set the backpack down, and let his eyes do the arithmetic. Every person in this room was dressed the way he was dressed. Whatever had sorted them back here, it was not a computer. His practiced eye moved across the room and cataloged everything on instinct. The out-of-order sign violated a standard he had written: personally broken equipment, repaired within 1 business day. No exceptions. The service corridor door was propped open with a mop bucket in plain view of guests. There was no attendant assigned to the room at all, which meant no one to notice, for example, if a tray of food arrived spoiled. He filed each detail away in the same calm inventory, one item after another, the way an auditor loads a weapon. Confirmation arrived within minutes. A young server appeared at the annex door balancing menus, and Olivia intercepted her in the corridor, close enough that her lowered voice still carried through the open doorway. "Standard trays only for the back room," the manager instructed. "Don't run the a la carte kitchen for these people, and don't linger with them either." The server's eyes flicked toward the annex, toward the faces inside it, and then dropped to the floor. She came in carrying the abbreviated menu coffee, 1 pastry, 1 breakfast tray, and an apology she was not allowed to say out loud. From his corner through the gap of the propped service door, Garrett could see a sliver of the world he had actually designed. Out there, servers moved between the leather chairs with omelets made to order, refilling coffee before anyone had to ask. Back here, the shortened menu promised a single pre-assembled tray delivered whenever the kitchen got around to it. Same lounge, same logo on the wall outside, 2 entirely different countries separated by a corridor and a judgment. Garrett sat with the laminated card in his hands and recognized the fork in the road because he had stood at it before. In his pocket was a phone with Marcus Cole 1 touch away, and in his head was a single sentence: "My name is on the ownership documents of this lounge that would detonate the entire morning." He could picture the aftermath with perfect clarity, the color draining from Olivia's face, the stampede of apologies, an emergency conference call by noon, her badge on a desk by evening. It would feel like justice, and it would change nothing that mattered. It was tempting, the way every shortcut is tempting, and it would teach him exactly nothing. The moment a company learns the owner is in the building begins to lie. Menus expand, smiles recalibrate, and whoever had been erasing complaints from the Charlotte system would spend the afternoon erasing better. The 12 deleted voices would stay deleted forever, traded away for 1 satisfying minute of watching a manager panic. But a nobody in a worn jacket could sit in this back room all morning, and the system would keep being itself right in front of him. People perform for power. No one performs for a man they have already dismissed. There was one more reason, and it was older than the company. In the years after his wife died, The years of grief night shifts and the same 2 shirts, Garrett had learned exactly how the world treats a man who looks like he is losing. Desk clerks had talked over him. Loan officers had smiled at his shoes. He had promised himself then that if he ever built something of his own, no tired stranger would ever be sorted, filed, and hidden inside it. That promise was the company. This morning, he intended to find out whether it still existed. So he made his choice the way he made most of them, quietly and all at once. He took out his phone and typed a single message to Marcus Cole on site. It is worse than the data suggested. Stay dark until I call. The reply arrived in 5 seconds, 2 words long, standing by. Garrett turned the phone face down on the table, ordered a black coffee from the shortened menu, and settled into the worn chair with the patience of a man who had nowhere else in the world to be. Beyond the corridor, the piano playlist kept playing for the people who had dressed correctly. In the back room, under a flag that read, "Observe," the owner of all of it sat observing. The branch had questioned him, tagged him, and tucked him out of sight, never suspecting that it had just handed the one man who could shut it all down a front-row seat to its secrets. The coffee arrived lukewarm. He let it sit untouched and waited to see what this place did next to people it believed were powerless. By 8:30, the annex had settled into its quiet, and Garrett had learned to read the sorting from his corner. Through the propped service door, he caught glimpses of the host stand, where the morning kept repeating itself in miniature. A man in a golf polo with a designer duffel was walked to the leather chairs before his pass finished scanning. 10 minutes behind him, a young woman in hospital scrubs first-class upgrade in hand after a night shift was told about capacity and pointed down the corridor. She took the table across from Garrett, set down her coffee thermos, and closed her eyes. Sophie Bennett appeared a little before 9, carrying a fresh carafe. The shortened menu had never promised. She swapped his cold, untouched cup for a hot one and set a warm croissant beside it, the kind reserved for the other room. Her eyes went once to the doorway before she spoke. "I'm sorry about earlier, Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly. "The pass was valid. It was valid the first time." He thanked her and asked in the mild tone of a man making conversation whether guests back here ever bothered to complain. The question changed her face. She straightened napkins that did not need straightening and lowered her voice beneath the hum of the vents. "They complain," she said. "It just doesn't go anywhere. The comment tablets don't send anything to headquarters directly. Everything routes through the manager's office first for review." A month ago, she told him an older gentleman had asked her to type his complaint word for word about cream cheese gone sour, and a manager who shrugged. She had found the entry 2 days later, rewritten into a compliment about the pastry selection. "Who has editing rights?" Garrett asked, still stirring coffee he had no plan to drink. Sophie glanced at the door again. "One login," she said. "Hers. Things get filed at night and they're gone by morning. And if you ask about it, you get the towel run or worse shifts or nothing at all." She gathered the empty sugar packets as if the conversation had been about sugar packets. "If anyone asks, I never said any of this," she added, and was gone before he could promise her anything. He sat with that for a while. 12 deleted complaints had a shape now, and the shape had a login. Somewhere in a back office, guests had spoken plainly about sour food, about shrugging managers, and a single account had rewritten them into applause before anyone at headquarters opened their eyes. He left the croissant where it was. In this building, he intended to swallow nothing he had not verified. He gave it a few minutes, then rose and walked toward the restrooms, past them, and along the service corridor the mop bucket had been holding open all morning. The air changed near the back cooler, then not cool enough. Outside the cold storage room, a steel cart stood loaded with sealed breakfast trays, sweating gently in the warm hallway air, nowhere near any refrigeration. A clipboard hung from the handle with the word "annex" written across the top in fat black marker. The cold storage door beside it hung open, a hand's width, its thermometer needle resting far above where any regulation would want it. Beyond the cart, the pantry door stood wide, and a broad-shouldered man whose tag read, Frank Dawson, was working with the calm of long routine. Cases stamped with the names of premium suppliers, smoked salmon, aged cheeses. Single-origin coffee rode a hand truck toward the service dock, where a man in street clothes waited beside an unmarked van envelope in hand. What came back off the van were plain white cartons, generic labels, the kind of stock no first-class menu had ever listed. Garrett drifted closer under the excuse of a wrong turn and watched Dawson do one thing more. At a prep counter sat a box of adhesive date labels and a metal scraper, and the pantry manager was peeling expiration stickers from carton lids and smoothing fresh ones into their place, moving dates forward with a thumb press each. "Same as last month," the man by the van said, handing over the envelope. Dawson pocketed it. "Nobody back there complains twice," he answered. Garrett lifted his phone as if checking the time and took 3 quiet photographs, the cart, the van, the labels. Before turning back, Dawson checked his watch and called toward the kitchen pass. "Annex cart goes out at 9:20. They've waited long enough back there." So the sweating trays in the warm hallway were the annex's breakfast, assembled from swapped stock, wearing fresh dates over old ones and standing unrefrigerated for hours by the time anyone would taste them. Garrett walked back the way he had come, unhurried, a man who had merely taken a wrong turn looking for the restroom. He was back in his corner chair before anyone marked his absence, and that was when Walter Briggs came down the corridor. The old man moved slowly and stood very straight, a canvas duffel in one hand and a ball cap on his head, with the name of an army unit stitched across the front. The desk had told him about capacity, too. He surveyed the annex without complaint, chose the seat beside Garrett's table, and eased into it with the sigh of a man whose knees had carried heavier things than luggage. They fell into the easy talk of strangers on the same flight. Walter was headed to Seattle as well, he said, to stand at a funeral on Thursday. The last man left from his old motor pool, a fellow he had pulled out of a burning truck a lifetime ago and argued with happily for 50 years since. "Flying first class one time in my life," Walter said, patting the armrest that had gone shiny with wear. "So far it looks a lot like the Army." Garrett laughed with him and moved his backpack so the old soldier could stretch his legs. At one point Walter nodded toward the corridor, and the music neither of them could quite hear. "Front desk looked at this cap and this coat and decided everything else," he said, without much bitterness, the way a man reports weather. 50 years since anybody saluted me. Thought first class might at least smile." Garrett told him the coffee was better than it looked, which was the only comfort the shortened menu allowed, and the old man chuckled and let it be. The breakfast trays arrived at 9:20, wheeled in on the same steel cart Garrett had seen sweating outside cold storage. The young server distributed them with an apology in her posture, and the annex began peeling back foil. Garrett looked down at his own tray and went still. The scrambled eggs had taken on a gray cast with a greenish rim where they touched the plate. The fruit lay slick and collapsing. The sliced chicken shone with a faint rainbow film, and beneath it all rose a thin, sour smell, the smell of something that had spent too long in a warm hallway. On the lid, one date sticker sat slightly crooked over the ghost of another. Beside him, Walter had already loaded his fork with eggs and was raising it still, telling the story about the burning truck. Garrett's hand came across and settled flat on the tray's edge, firm and unhurried. "Don't eat that, Walter," he said. "Smell it first. Look at the color along the rim." He turned the old man's lid over and found the same crooked sticker, the same batch, the same sweating foil. Around the room, forks went down one by one. The nurse in scrubs leaned over her tray, sniffed once, pushed it away with 2 fingers, and lifted her phone to record. The server stood frozen between tables, and word must have traveled on her radio because Olivia Harper came through the annex door in under a minute smile already set to concerned. Garrett lifted his tray toward her label up so she could see everything. She never let her eyes touch it. "Sir," she said at a volume built for an audience, "you are disturbing our guests and interfering with food service. This is exactly the behavior we flagged this morning." To the server, she added, crisp as dictation, "Log an incident. Guest aggressive with staff and other passengers. Refused service caused a scene." The young server did not move. Her hands stayed at her sides, her eyes stayed on the gray eggs, and whatever she had been ordered to type, she typed none of it. Olivia's smile thinned by a degree. She drew her own tablet from under her arm and entered the incident herself, thumbs quick with practice, reading the words aloud as she went so the room could hear the official version being born. Then she turned to the room and found her hospitality voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption. Staff will be collecting all trays for quality assurance." Two servers began lifting foil lids closed and stacking evidence onto the cart with remarkable speed. Garrett kept one hand flat on his own tray and the other on Walter's, and when a server reached for them anyway, he met the young woman's eyes and shook his head once. She withdrew, as if grateful for the excuse. From the doorway came Sophie's voice, thinner than before, but audible. "That isn't what happened. He stopped a guest from eating spoiled." Olivia turned her head the same precise few degrees she had used at the desk that morning. "One more word, Sophie, and you can clean out your locker today. The Delaney party is waiting on you." Sophie's mouth closed. Her eyes found Garrett's for half a second, and what stood in them was not surrender. It was calculation rent references, the price of being right out loud. And between those two sentences, the whole design finished assembling itself in Garrett's mind. This had never been rudeness. It was a machine theft rolling out through the dock on one side, poison trays rolling into the annex on the other, and a single login in the middle taught to erase whatever anyone said about either. Olivia stepped to that wall phone by the annex door and dialed with the ease of routine. "Security to the Skylight Lounge annex room," she said pleasantly. "We have a disruptive individual refusing to comply." Down the corridor, the words outran her. Through the gap of the propped door, Garrett watched Frank Dawson react to annex, and security the way a man reacts to a fire alarm he has been expecting. The pantry manager began stripping labels into a trash bag, feeding delivery sheets into a shredder that whined against the quiet, and dragging the last premium cases toward the compactor at the dock. Garrett did not raise his voice and did not stand. He photographed the two trays side by side, lids up, stickers showing. He slipped one sealed yogurt cup swollen at the foil into the front pocket of his backpack. He sent the morning's photographs to Marcus Cole under a single word ready and set the phone face down again as the entrance filled with uniforms. The officer from the morning came first, a second officer behind him, both squaring toward the corner table where the man in the worn jacket sat quietly beside his evidence. Walter pushed himself upright, cap and all, and put his body half between them. "You're looking at the wrong man," the old soldier said. "This fellow just kept me from eating poison, and that woman never once looked at the tray." Olivia's sympathy did not flicker. "Sir, please sit down before you hurt yourself," she said. And to the officers, "He has been harassing guests since he arrived. I want him removed from the concourse, and I want it on record that his access is revoked." She swiped her tablet with a flourish and turned the screen toward Garrett. His own profile. His own name unread above her thumb, the word revoked in red beneath it. The officers moved a step closer, and the annex went silent, except for the shredder, still whining down the hall. This was the moment the room believed it was watching a poor man run out of road. Garrett looked once around it at Walter, standing crooked and stubborn at the nurse with her phone raised, and steady still recording at Sophie in the doorway holding towels she had never delivered, and understood that there was nothing left in this branch to learn. Everything the deleted complaints had tried to say he had now seen with his own eyes, photographed and carried in his backpack. The lead officer put a hand near Garrett's elbow without quite touching it. "Sir, you're coming with us off the concourse. Leave the bag." Olivia folded the moment into a smile for the room assurance that everything was handled, that the morning would now return to its regularly scheduled comfort. Garrett did not argue with any of it. There was no one in this lounge left to persuade, and nothing left to prove by talking. He looked down at the phone in his hand instead, so he lifted the phone and touched a single name. It rang once. "Marcus," Garrett said in a voice that did not rise and did not hurry. "Execute the Charlotte hold. Freeze every editing credential in this branch, seal the pantry and both cold rooms, and suspend all lounge operations effective now. Then come upstairs." Olivia laughed one short note of it and folded her arms. "Call the governor while you're at it," she said. "Officers, he's stalling." The building answered before the officers could. Her tablet locked mid-gesture, the screen washing red beneath a banner that read, "Operation Suspended Corporate Audit Hold." At the entrance, the badge panel blinked from green to red, and the frosted doors sighed shut on their magnets. In the kitchen, the ticket printer stopped mid-line. Out in the main room, conversations died against the sudden quiet where the piano playlist had been. And down the service corridor, Frank Dawson's terminal froze with his deletions half finished, the receiving log locked open on the screen like a hand caught in a drawer. For 4 minutes, nobody in the Skylight Lounge moved except to look at one another. Then the frosted doors released for the badge that outranked every badge, and Marcus Cole walked in with 6 auditors in gray and 2 members of the executive board at his shoulder, all of them moving past marble and orchids without a glance. Marcus crossed the main room, entered the annex, and stopped in front of the corner table. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, loudly enough that no one in either room could mistake it. "We're in position. The branch is sealed." Behind him, an auditor was already photographing the cart of collected trays before a server could wheel it another inch. The officers stepped back from the worn jacket as if it had changed temperature. Somewhere behind Olivia Harper, a tray settled against a table with a small click, and that was the only sound, while her face performed its slow arithmetic. The reservation, she had never read the profile. She had flagged the name that had been glowing green on her screen since the moment it first cleared that morning. Garrett Sullivan. The man she had spent the morning trying to remove owned every chair, every tray, and every record in the building, and the machine she had built in the dark now stood in full light, sealed, frozen, and wearing her login on every edit. The lockdown held for less than an hour, but the lounge never went back to being what it had been. Auditors in gray moved through both rooms with tablets and evidence bags, courteous and unstoppable, while gate agents walked the stranded guests to a partner lounge 2 concourses away with apologies and meal vouchers. On Garrett's instruction, the annex guests went first ahead of the cashmere and the leather, and more than one of them looked back at the man in the worn jacket on the way out, quietly recalculating everything about the morning. Marcus Cole ran the seal like a surgery. One team took the pantry and both cold rooms, photographing thermometer needles before touching a single handle. A second took the manager's office and the servers, and a third collected every tray from the steel cart lids, taped shut, batch stickers photographed exactly where they sat. Garrett unzipped the front pocket of his backpack and handed over the swollen yogurt cup, and the auditor who received it logged the little container with the same gravity she would have given a weapon. Olivia Harper tried management first. She offered to walk the team through her filing system, described the morning as a capacity issue, and characterized the corner table as a disturbance she had handled strictly by the book. Marcus let her reach the end of it, then read from his tablet in a level voice credentials frozen, relieved of duty, pending investigation badge, and devices to be surrendered on site. Her tablet was already sealed in a labeled bag, and the incident she had typed over the trays sat preserved inside it, word for word, under her own account. Before leaving, the nurse in scrubs stepped over and offered her phone. She had been recording since the moment the trays were served, she said, because she had worked around kitchens long enough to trust her nose, and the video held all of it. The gray eggs, the crooked sticker, and a manager directing staff to log an aggressive guest without once lowering her eyes to the food. An auditor copied the file and thanked her by name for the record. Olivia watched from across the room and said nothing at all. At the service dock, they found Frank Dawson standing over a shredder jammed with delivery sheets, 3 premium cases stacked beside a compactor he had never gotten the chance to run. The receiving log still glowed on his frozen terminal, open to a page that matched no supplier invoice in the building. When corporate security asked him to empty his pockets, the envelope came out thick and creased. He laid it on the steel counter, asked for a lawyer, and offered nothing else. Airport police were standing on the concourse within 20 minutes. While the teams worked, Garrett gave the 2 board members the same tour the morning had given him. He showed them the host stand, then the corridor, then the annex, the taped out-of-order sign, the window facing a concrete blast wall, the door a mop bucket had held open all day. "This branch scored 98% last month," he said, letting them stand in the room for a while. "This is what a perfect number looks like from the back." Neither board member answered him. One of them stood a long moment in front of the taped sign, as if memorizing it. His next order had nothing to do with any of it. He walked Walter Briggs out of the annex himself, carried the duffel over one shoulder, and settled the old man in the partner lounge with a breakfast cooked to order and an escort arranged through Seattle boarding. Walter looked at the deference trailing them down the concourse and let out one dry laugh. "This morning they wouldn't smile at either of us," he said. 50 years I've judged men by how they act when nobody salutes." "You'll do, Mr. Sullivan." Garrett took the offered hand and held it a moment longer than a stranger would. "Stand straight on Thursday," he said. "Your friend from the motor pool gets the full uniform." Walter promised he would. A week later, a postcard from Seattle reached the Charlotte audit office. 5 words in a steady old hand. First class finally looked right. Garrett kept it in his desk drawer on top of everything else the branch had produced. Sophie Bennett's moment came an hour into the interviews. Olivia was being escorted past the host stand when Sophie stepped out from behind it, phone in hand, and asked the auditors for 1 minute of the record. On her screen were photographs she had taken weeks ago and mentioned to no one the old gentleman's complaint exactly as she had typed it, time-stamped, and beside it the same entry 2 days later, rewritten into praise for the pastry selection. Her hands were not entirely steady. Her voice was, "He asked me to write it word for word, so I did," she said. Then somebody unwrote it. She scrolled through more dates. She remembered names, shifts where a guest had spoken up, and the system had gone quiet by morning. Marcus took the phone with both hands, the way people accept something fragile, and told her in front of every witness present that what she had just done was protected in writing effective immediately. Olivia's escort continued toward the doors. No one moved to slow it down. At the frosted glass, she stopped and turned, as if one question had been sitting in her throat since the badge came off. "You booked under your real name," she said. "It was right there. Why not just say who you were?" Garrett answered without heat, because the answer had been true for 20 years. "The name was never supposed to matter. My reservation sat on your screen for 20 minutes, cleared in green, and you read the jacket instead." She had nothing to give the record after that, and the doors closed behind her. By evening, 2 more servers had asked to give statements of their own. Protection, it turned out, was contagious. The findings took 9 days, and they read the way the morning had felt. The annex cold room had been running 11 degrees warmer than regulation. For months, its maintenance tickets closed in the system without a repair ever being made. Trash pulls recovered more than 100 lids wearing double stickers, fresh dates pressed over expired ones, the scraper marks matching the tool from Frank Dawson's prep counter. The county lab ran cultures on that morning's batch, and the batch failed every single one. The money told the rest. Premium stock arrived on the invoices week after week, while only a fraction of it ever reached a shelf. The difference rolled out through the dock in unmarked vans and came back as plain white cartons at a quarter of the cost. Tens of thousands of dollars a season split between a pantry manager's envelopes and a ledger nobody was ever meant to audit. The van's buyer was identified from dock footage within the week and named in the referral to the district attorney, alongside Dawson himself. The server backup surrendered the last of it without a fight. All 12 deleted complaints came back whole, and every deletion carried the same single login. Most of them executed between 11 at night and 1 in the morning. The 3-letter flag pressed onto Garrett's profile turned up on dozens of others, and the pattern beneath it was anything but random notes about attire, about luggage, about guests who had not presented appropriately. The annex had never been overflow. It was a verdict rendered at the host stand, one glance at a time. Headquarters formally closed the Charlotte branch that first week. Health inspectors condemned the compromised stock, and the investigation ran with counsel in the room and every interview on the record, because Garrett insisted the process be cleaner than the thing it was cleaning. Olivia Harper was suspended first and terminated at the end of it. Falsified records retaliation against staff, and a sorting system she had built, taught, and defended. Frank Dawson was dismissed the same afternoon, and 2 more employees who had moved cases at the dock and understood what the envelopes meant were dismissed with the findings stapled to their files. Nobody was fired for silence alone, and that distinction mattered to Garrett more than any headline. Before any press could ask, the 12 deleted guests were found and called one by one. The woman who had been sick for 2 days after the chicken wrap got her call from Garrett personally, along with an apology that named exactly what had been done to her complaint and by whom. Refunds went out, medical bills were covered without argument, and every restored complaint was answered in writing. Several accepted the calls with grace, a few hung up on him, and Garrett understood that too. 12 voices that had been erased at midnight were read at last in daylight. The rest of the staff were sorted by what they had chosen. Those who had only carried what they were handed, the young server among them, kept their jobs and went through retraining, built around a single sentence: an instruction is not a shield. The server who had stood in the annex and refused to type the false incident received a commendation in writing. She kept it framed at her station. The sessions ran for weeks in the papered-over lounge, and by the end of them, the staff were rewriting the service standards themselves. Sophie was cleared of every retaliation mark that had ever been slipped into her file, restored with back pay, and offered a chair that had not existed before the company's first guest advocate reporting to the audit office instead of to any branch manager alive. She helped design the machine that replaced the old one, and she was ruthless about its details. Complaints now traveled straight from a guest's hand into an independent queue at headquarters, readable by many people and editable by none, and every complaint was acknowledged back to the guest within 1 hour, so that silence itself became impossible to manufacture. The old 3-letter flag was purged from every profile in the network, its future use classified as grounds for immediate termination, and within days of the anonymous staff line opening 3 other branches, quietly self-reported their own back rooms. 3 more walls came down without a single press release. The rest of the reform left Garrett's office in plain language. Every overflow room annex and quiet back corridor in more than 40 lounges was eliminated. 1 floor, 1 menu, 1 standard bin with no exceptions written in anyone's handwriting. Cold chain temperatures were photographed and logged twice a shift, and unannounced third-party inspections replaced the branch's own scorekeeping, so the silver emblem over every entrance stopped being decoration and started being terms. He said only one thing to the assembled Charlotte staff before the windows were papered over for renovation. "The logo out front makes a promise to everyone who walks underneath it," he told them, in the same level voice he had used on the phone that morning. "From now on, the building keeps it." Then he flew home, and the jewel of the network went dark for 6 weeks. While its walls came down, the first to fall were the ones that had hidden the annex. Garrett asked for photographs of that particular wall coming down and got them. One object survived the demolition on purpose. The out-of-order sign, taped and retaped until the paper had gone soft, was pulled off the dead machine and framed behind glass in the audit office above a single printed line dated from the machine's first ignored repair ticket. This was acceptable here for 2 years. Marcus hung it where every new auditor would pass it on their first day. Reopening day arrived with the smell of fresh paint and espresso drifting past the frosted glass on a course D. Where 2 rooms had been, there was now 1 wide floor under the same honey-colored light, the marble buffet island visible from every chair in the house. The coffee machine in the corner was brand new, and it worked. At the host stand beside the orchids sat a small printed card listing what every guest was owed the same card at every seat in every lounge. Garrett booked the ticket the way he always had. Full fare, his own name, no calls made. And no one warned. The jacket was the same 15-year-old jacket, the backpack, the same faded backpack, and the young man at the host stand had been hired 3 weeks earlier and had never once seen his face. The scan chimed a clean green. "You're all set, Mr. Sullivan. Sit anywhere you like, and breakfast is made to order." The whole verification took 40 seconds, because 40 seconds was all the pass required. He crossed a floor that no longer kept a back of the house for people. Work boots rested beside cashmere hospital scrubs beside pressed suits, and 1 identical menu lay on every table. He took the corner where the annex door used to hang and ordered the breakfast tray out of old habit. When it came, he turned the lid over the way he had 6 weeks earlier, 1 label flat and singled the date honest under the light. The eggs were hot. The fruit was bright. He ate all of it. Across the room, Sophie was training 2 new hires at the host stand, and she caught sight of him mid-sentence. 1 small nod traveled the length of the lounge, and nothing else. No upgrade materialized. No manager appeared. No one hovered. Out of professional curiosity, he opened the feedback card on his phone and typed 4 words into the independent queue. Coffee could be hotter. Before he finished the cup, Marcus answered from headquarters, received unedited, logged. Garrett came close to laughing out loud. As he gathered the backpack, a man came through the frosted doors in a coat gone thin at the seams, carrying a duffel older than Walter's, and the new hire at the stand scanned his pass, chimed green, and walked him to the leather chairs without a flicker of arithmetic. Nobody measured the coat. Nobody rerouted him down a corridor. The system had simply stopped being able to read clothes. Garrett shouldered the faded backpack and walked out under the silver emblem past the host stand into the moving river of the concourse. Nobody saluted him, and nobody stared, and that was the entire victory. They had served spoiled food in his own lounge to the people least able to fight back, and he had shut it down for them, because a reputation is only real when it survives the guest with no power to punish you. He smiled at nothing in particular, unnoticed, exactly as planned.